Hey guys, this is Dan with Gears and Gadgets. Thanks for tuning in. I'm out here at Camp Razor. They invited me out here because, well, they actually unveiled the new Race LE model. Now, I also had an opportunity to sit down with Tanner Foust, which blows my mind. Awesome guy. Just kind of sat down and just talked more about, like, you know, the person more or less than like the accolades, but he has plenty of accolades to go with the name as well.
3.5 million boxes? I don't know.
Tanner Foust, ladies and gentlemen, the Hot Wheels double loop there.
Tanner is just flying. He's a whole element ahead of Sandell.
So, Tanner Foust.
How's it going, man?
I'm super honored to have time with you first and foremost.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a pretty different approach. I'm in the YouTube space, kind of worked my career, hated my life into like my mid-30s, just doing the typical corporate nonsense. Started a YouTube channel, and now here I am at like Camp Razor, sitting here with Tanner Foust. So like,
awesome.
How the hell did you end up going like a career trajectory to go from being in school to kind of like this whole racing career that you have now?
I mean, I think it's similar to probably how you changed gears in your life. I was just sort of on the path that was laid out, you know. I wasn't the best student in high school, but I did well enough, you know, to get into school. My parents sort of had this thing that if I got below a 3.0, I think, it might have been a 3.5 in high school, I didn't get to drive to school. So like I was a 3.50017, you know, just I wasn't really a motivated student. It was whatever I needed to do to keep my driver's license. And so in college, I started in engineering. Didn't do very well with that. I just wasn't ready to be in school. It wasn't the right thing. I took a couple years off and went skiing. When I came back to school, I was motivated to finish, but still, like I think so many people, and probably like yourself just a few years ago, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it. I wasn't sure what wouldn't be work.
Right.
You know? Because I had never met anybody entrepreneurial. I didn't have, my dad's a doctor. Everybody in my family were kind of like, you know, scholastically trained, and then they went into their fields, you know? So it wasn't until I met an inventor and I worked for this guy at Bill Kitchen, he was an inventor of amusement rides, that I ever met somebody that just did whatever they thought was fun, you know, for a living. Hey, see you later. Yeah, no problem.
How you doing? Good to see you. Yeah, same.
Yeah, really, it wasn't until I kind of met somebody that he built amusement rides, and he was into skydiving, so he built rides that felt like skydiving. That I ever thought, wow, you can just do something fun and then figure out how to make the money part later. And I saw a racetrack from an airplane. I was probably in my last year of school at the University of Colorado. All my family thought I would go straight from undergrad, straight into med school, take the MCATs, do all that stuff. I saw this racetrack from the airport. I went to the racetrack and from the airplane when we were landing in Denver, went to the racetrack. A guy came and said, hey, you can't be here, you know, and I ended up striking up a conversation with that guy and was just like, you know, let me intern for you on your race team or something. There's got to be something I can do for free.
Sure.
And he wanted somebody to kind of organize his Excel, you know, some of his accounting and stuff like that. And I was decent with the computer. But what I really ended up doing was being a mechanic in return for some seat time in the cars, got a racing license. And that was the first time I ever saw kind of a pathway to like, maybe there's baby steps to get to a place where you can drive for a living.
Similar but different. So I grew up, my parents, super blue collar. My dad, I think, made like $8 an hour until I was like 15 years old. So I wasn't really able to chase passions until like I got old enough to realize like, hey, you can actually just kind of make your life whatever you want. Sort of the same thing, like YouTube, I didn't start really making any money off of until the last couple years. My wife thought I was insane. I'm sitting here talking to cameras like a lunatic in my garage, but now she's starting to see, you know, that stuff.
Good for you.
But going through that, like, you know, your parents being obviously like they were monetizing careers, kind of the same idea on the other side of the spectrum of like you get your education, you go to work, you make money. How did they view you like starting to chase these like the racing career?
And they thought it was I mean, they knew I loved cars. My mom always was like, well, if you put half as much effort into school as you put into cleaning your car, you know, it was always that kind of, they knew I had a passion for cars. never saw a pathway to making a living. I think later we've talked about it. They thought, an intervention might be necessary if I went into it for more than a few years.
Okay.
They were they were very supportive about just letting you run, It was never even a question when I wanted to go to school in Colorado, even though we lived in Virginia. They were very open about just letting you run and learn the lesson yourself, and then be ready for when you come back to what they saw was the inevitable path.
So when did you get to a point where they were letting you fail, where you were able to come back with something where they kind of had to go like, uh-oh, this might be a thing?
I think it was about 4 years after I got a job as that mechanic. I worked for 8 months in order to do one race. On that team. Rich Dahl owned a team called Eurosport Limited. They were literally based right next to the airport in Denver. And then one of the cars was sponsored by Winter Driving School that I worked on. It was a Formula Mazda, and it had a Winter Driving School logo on it. And I asked one of the guys, one of the drivers was this guy Kevin Schrantz, and he got me an interview up at the Winter Driving School, which is in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And so I went up there for the winter and was to get a job as an instructor. And I got a job as an instructor there, and I learned so much, not just about driving and about car control, but about how to talk cars. I was just like 99.9% of the college students out there. Public speaking was my worst nightmare. But in talking about something I was passionate about, it's amazing how that changes.
Yeah.
And so I gave talks to, 3,000 person groups for Schlumberger Oil on safety driving techniques and stuff like that, and really learn to embrace the importance of being able to talk. And that led to a whole TV side career. And so each one of those little forks in the road, and each one of those little conversations having, with different people that help you make the next little step, were each absolutely critical. Eventually it got to the point where I lived in Steamboat. My dad was like an Olympic hopeful in the 60s, and so he was kind of stoked that I was living in Steamboat because he's a skier, and that used to be the Olympic training grounds.
Yep.
My mom was kind of probably wondering when, I wasn't asking for money, so it must be working out a little bit, but I also was getting to travel quite a lot, because in the summers I was doing these marketing events for manufacturers called Ride and Drives. I was learning about the industry. I still wasn't holding a racing steering wheel and getting money in return. I was doing some club racing, but doing marketing events and coaching for money. So
fascinating.
Yeah, so it did take a while before I finally found a sponsor that would pay me to drive, and that happened a car dealership while I was on a hiatus from school, transitioning from engineering to pre-med. A car dealer, I worked at a Subaru dealership, and the guy who owned that car dealership came up to Steamboat and drove it out on the ice track that I worked at, and then was like, hey, we should go rally racing. This is super fun. And literally bought a used rally car that afternoon. He did. And his wife thought he looked great in a driving suit, so that right away covered us for like 5 years of racing. And that's, that was the beginning of actually getting paid to do.
That's amazing. And then like your trajectory in terms of like career, it's like you've gotten into so many different like sub segments of like the car community, like the TV and racing, and like multiple different versions of race. Like you've kind of touched like just a ton of different things. Like what do you credit that to?
Yeah. I guess insecurity, for one. It always felt like easy come, easy go. So I better diversify. Just in case this doesn't work out, you know what I mean? Maybe this other thing will work out. That's probably subconsciously what that's about. But also just wanted to try different stuff. For me, there were 3 pillars in my world. Racing was the core. I wanted to race what was interesting to sponsors and what I thought was fun. And I did rally and drifting were really the first paid gigs that I had. I did those simultaneously. The other one was TV, which came from drifting. One of the producers of the drift content did some other shows and hired me to be kind of a driving host for, first of all, in hotel room videos, not the kind that you probably have seen.
Hello, meine dispatcher says there's something wrong with deine Kabel.
Yeah, come on in.
You can imagine where it goes from here.
He fixes the cable.
But they're just like driving cars. And then I did Supercars Exposed, Battle of the Supercars with Paul Tracy with that, and that led to eventually doing Top Gear. And so there was the racing, then there was the TV, and then the third one was stunt driving. And a lot of the guys that I knew from rally and drifting, because of all the car control stuff, it applied to stunt driving in films.
Sure.
So my first movie was Dukes of Hazzard in 2005, and then the second movie was, well, there were a few in there, but Tokyo Drift was one that now has just started to come back into the light. It was a pretty small movie back then. Mm-hmm. And then since then, I've been lucky to do a lot of them. And I really love driving for camera. I love photography. And so I love kind of visualizing how to take action through the screen and make things look as exciting as they feel. But
so it's really you're living this like passion, like everything, even thinking about like, it's not just the car, like you're talking about doing it for camera, like you're like, it's like an out-of-body experience almost, where you're trying to like view what you're doing in real time for the camera.
Stunt driving is great. Well, there's a couple, there's commercials and then there's movies. And, where movies, sometimes you crash on purpose. It's all about exciting. It's about telling the story. Sometimes, like with Tokyo Drift, it's about acting with your style of driving. I love all those storytelling aspects also.
That's awesome.
But even just with commercials, it's about understanding how the light's going to reflect, making sure you're not in the camera shadow, and understanding also what the director, sometimes the director has done a music video, but never a car commercial. Sometimes they're great car commercial directors, sometimes not. So a lot of it is translating what they want to feel into what's physically happening. And that's a challenge, and I love that stuff. And I really, really do enjoy stunt driving.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just so inspiring, and I think I don't know if I'm getting old and I'm starting to feel like just this sense of like just putting it out there to the world that like you can really kind of do anything. I get so bummed out like in the YouTube space, and I'm sure you probably have like newer like drivers and stuff that come around that are like critical of things that you might do, and it's like, well, in the YouTube space you get comments like trolls and all kind of stuff. It's like it's way harder to turn a camera on and like put yourself out there. It's a lot easier to like judge people from a distance, and of course it's kind of like a sad reality of the world. But
it's a little nature of the beast. I mean, you look at, you've heard this 1,000 times probably, not to sound old, but previous generations, right? They didn't necessarily have a lot of these options. They feel, even though there've been entrepreneurs out there since the beginning, I think it was a bit more challenging. Now, if your product is communication, then you do have your own distribution network that you can create. You don't have to be hired by a network or channel or whatever.
Right.
So you don't have to know the right people, and you don't have to make the relationships and use your parents' friends to get your foot in the door. You can kind of create your own distribution, and that's incredibly empowering, but it's a two-way street. This distribution is now. So yeah, you're going to get comments, and that's...
Yeah.
And the important thing is that the bigger you get and the better you get, the worse the comments are going to be, and you got to take those as compliments. And it's unfortunate for whatever's happening in that person's life.
Yeah.
But I used to get butthurt pretty easily about stuff online. And I was on Top Gear, the US version, right? So you had all these diehards, even though only 5% of our audience had ever seen the UK show, which means 95% did not. You had those 5% were just the most vocal people.
Yeah, the loudest minority.
And I learned pretty quick, and I also raced a Beetle, a 600 horsepower rallycross Beetle. And when talking to Volkswagen about that and getting that program going, it was important to get as much negative. It's weird to say, but it was good to get negative response early, because then as you went, you could measure a delta from negative to positive. If you just started out with a win, where are you going to go? So you need to come out and you need to have some misses in order to have some value to where you're able to progress.
That's fascinating with the Beetle thing too, because that mindset is basically like, if they're not engaged negatively early on, then there's nobody really to change the opinion of later on.
Yeah, I don't believe in creating negativity just for the PR, even though it's probably very functional and it probably works great. But, coming out with a car that literally had a flower in a vase from the factory, and saying, we're going to go, this is a beast, it's got, go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds and jumps, big jumps, and come out and try to make it so tough. It's a challenge, just like, the UK fans of the Top Gear show had such a problem with, other versions. If they make marketing sense, there's a reason, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. I mean, our show was produced by BBC Worldwide Productions, which is a for-profit company. BBC is a non-profit company, so they owned by the British government essentially, so they have to go do these Australian versions in order to monetize the brand. They can't just sell a bunch of magazines and get there's other ways for them to monetize. So there's a lot of reasons why things happen that people don't realize necessarily. But to your point, all they really can do is just negatively comment. But from your seat, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Because now here you are, that you've turned that around, and you'll continue to turn it around, and it only adds value to what you're doing, which is distributing the story.
What's wild about it too, because it's like the influencer thing, and it's like it's not really as much. You only influence as you build an audience. It's like a byproduct of doing the work. It's not like the intent of doing the work.
Yes.
So like I enjoy that aspect of it, but the Top Gear thing to me is ridiculously fascinating, because like the amount of passionate people, like aggressively passionate people on both sides is like so bizarre to me, because like it was a great show. Both shows were great shows. There's like a difference between the two, but I've never understood the whole like Top Gear drama aspect of
no, it's good. It's amazing, because I think Top Gear, the original show, I loved it. But if I was really honest, I would say that I'd never really watched a show from beginning to end. I'd seen the individual films on YouTube.
Yep.
Because it wasn't aired in the US. I'd seen, the race between the Eurojet and the Bugatti. I'd seen all of the different films, like most people in the US that are diehard fans, but probably like a lot of them, I'd never really seen a whole show. But they were clever. They were, the three hosts weren't anything but amazing at talking about nothing.
Broken my headlights, radiator, my bull bar's broken.
Like, they're brilliant at talking about nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy produced our show the first season and was on set, and so it was good to get to know him. I did some Top Gear live stuff with the three of them, and I've been on the UK show as, James, his driving coach on actually the last show that ever aired. So I don't want to take blame for that, but there's I think there were a lot. So I guess what I'm slowly getting to is that there's people took ownership of that show because they kind of felt like they knew more about it than the next person. We're all kind of online experts sometimes. You notice even during COVID, instantly everybody's like an expert on stuff.
Yeah.
It's an amazing time because everybody is an expert. And so they take ownership of it and they have pride associated with that. And so I think that's better than nothing.
Right.
And some of my co-hosts sometimes took offense to stuff, and I just think I had always didn't have a thicker skin, but I always thought, you know what? People talking shit about something is better than not at all. And a lot of the people that were talking smack, I guess, in that circumstances probably had never even seen the UK show.
Right.
They were just fans,
jumping on a bandwagon, basically.
They were kind of fans of how it made them feel, and they, in thetheir friend group, they may have been the only one that knew what Top Gear was, and they kind of took pride in that,
So what's your view on, you kind of mentioned it earlier about, you had an experience in your career going through like traditional media, and now like anybody can pick up a camera and kind of make their own entertaining content. Of course, we see it unfortunately with like, dopes in the streets doing things they shouldn't do, and, racing and stuff like that. But I mean, for the most part, like what's your opinion on like the new form of media versus old, and how like virtually anybody can get into it now without needing the connections, so to speak? So you can kind of build your own path.
I think it's tricky because there's not a lot of accountability for the information. So you rely on viewers themselves to make a decision then. They can't just say, oh, well, it's on NBC, so I'm sure they fact-checked because they don't want to get sued. It's on a YouTube channel that these people a lot of people just don't necessarily fact check or do a lot of research. So it puts the onus on the consumer to decide what they believe. And I don't know if that onus has been on us as a culture for very long.
Yeah, you're right. The idea of like journalistic integrity across any medium is like kind of not there. It's just, what can I say that's the most ridiculous thing that's going to get the most amount of clicks and views, and you know, people are kind of chasing it that way. But I do think that stuff also kind of has a way of like weeding that out a little bit. Some people do get successful with it short term, but then they can't kind of carry it on. So like, I do think that some of it kind of cuts out some of the bullshit a little bit too over time, but there's certainly enough bullshit to go around for everybody. But
at the end of the day, it's incredible. You know, I've been racing now for somewhere between 25 and 30 years, and the only way I can imagine that my career would go that long is the fact that I have social media and YouTube, and if we lose the race, you know, that's not necessarily the end of our job. We can still tell the story for our sponsors through other ways with our own distribution and always fall back on that.
yeah,
And so it gives you, I think, the ability to to choose your career, to your point, and maintain it and grow it. And if you have an element of savage in you, then you can crush. And how awesome is that?
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things I've seen recently, I'm a big fan. I don't know if you know, like Cleetus McFarland on YouTube, big you know, drag race. Like the idea that social media is also helping kind of save some of like the dying sectors. Like there's tracks that are closing all
100%.
over the U.S. and it's like now you actually have like a breath of like new life into, you know, the whole, you know, motorsports, power sports, everything's starting to have this exposure on social media and kind of breathing a whole new life into it. It's wild to watch.
Totally. And you know, Cleetus and I have talked a lot about aviation because, you know, I'm a pilot. And,
I didn't know that.
And I talk a lot with, you know, the Diesel brothers about that.
Yep.
And I remember when McFarland just started posting a few aviation things just to try it out. And I genuinely think he really didn't think it would take.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his crowd loved the track, they loved the burnouts. So, I mean, he knew his audience, but he did so well with the aviation stuff. Now he's just buying stuff and making projects out of aviation things.
Which is awesome.
It's awesome. It's amazing. And I'm such a big proponent of that layer of freedom that we have in the U.S.
Yep.
Really, the U.S. and Canada are kind of two of the only places really left in, you know, civilized world where it's reasonably affordable to fly and to have that freedom. That sounds bougie and everything like that, but literally I flew here and got better gas mileage than if I would have driven a pickup truck.
That's awesome.
And it's, but it will take me 30 minutes to get back to the coast instead of 3.5 hours. So it's like, there's that layer of freedom that we have here depending on where you live. And I love that they are putting general aviation into like cognitive, like within reach of a huge audience. It's just so awesome. And that's the nature of that beast is, oh, the numbers are good on that. Let's keep doing more stuff down that road. Yes, McFarland always is leaning towards, let's save this track, save this raceway, save that. And I've been out to his track. I've done the Freedom 500 3 times.
Yep.
Finished second 3 times. But that's
a race. I want to get into that race so bad. It's like I gotta get 5 million more subscribers before I'll be in that race. But that's such a dream. It looks amazing.
It is so awesome. I'm just such a fan of that whole process.
Yeah.
And I love what Dave Sparks and the Diesel brothers do with theirs. With their excavation videos, they get great numbers, and it I mean, he's helping people. I remember Big Bear, not too far from here, that huge snow. There were problems there. Those were people in dire need, and because YouTube was this great distribution and it was financially viable, it wasn't all out of his pocket. But also just because they're good people.
Yeah.
You know, Dave Sparks and those guys get out there and they're helping people out of their homes and they're digging things out with their equipment. They just have access to that stuff that not many people do.
Yeah, and I met those guys at an event last year. Really, really great guys. And that's also another fascinating thing with, like, you know, those are guys, very lucrative TV careers that kind of just pivoted to the social media space because they can do what they want, how they want, and it's amazing to see. So like that's a transition that I've loved to watch too. I pay very much a lot of attention to like the minutia with all that stuff, like watching those career transitions.
For me, like while I do post occasional things about, you know, aviation, I'm a big fan of motorsport. This
Yeah.
is something that's been passionate to me for a long time. I'm a big fan of like the innovation that happens in the cars. Like for 100 years now, we've been racing stuff, and you have seatbelts and disc brakes and all the things that came out of racing. All those innovations came from competition. And so I love motorsport, and that's why I still race, whether it's EV, gas, doesn't matter to me. As long as manufacturers are continuing to use competition to evolve, then cars are not going to get stagnant. And I love the fact that with side-by-sides and with Polaris, the barrier to entry into just enjoying it, like people do here at Camp Razor, or to racing it is so low compared to even what I got involved in with Formula Mazdas, just from a financial standpoint and a commitment standpoint. It's so low to the barrier to entry to get into racing with side-by-sides, and it's such rewarding racing. And it gets hooked into those families maybe that are going to continue that racing through generations. So I'm just a big fan of anything that creates the market for motorsport and innovation. And it's one of the, while I don't race a Polaris often, it's one of the reasons it's one of my favorite partnerships is because they grow the world of racing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I appreciate the time. I know we're at time here for our interview, but
sorry, I feel like I talked a lot.
No, it's fantastic stuff. I just, like I said, I like to kind of get into the more of like who you are, not necessarily like what you're doing, and
totally,
it's really cool. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Yeah, same.